I have this vivid memory that I've never been able to shake. I am 8 years old, a third grader at my local elementary school. It's a cool morning at early recess time, early enough that the dew in the newly laid grass has not yet evaporated, and I can still see all of the children's footprints. Some of the children are playing tag, others are on the swings of the new playground, and still others just mill around in small groups chatting together. And I am sitting on the wet, rotting steps of an old portable classroom building. I am hugging my legs with one arm, my chin resting on my knees. With my other hand, I pick away at the rotting wooden steps. Over on the basketball courts, the third grade teachers are sitting on plastic chairs, kibitzing with one another. Why this particular day and image arises in my thoughts, I'm not sure, but it symbolizes what school was like for me. I was bullied relentlessly for all sorts of reasons, but the one that is most striking to me is that I was bullied because I am Jewish. I had come from a religious day school, and in coming to a new secular school, I stood out as different when all I wanted was to fit in. The experience of being bullied for much of my childhood shaped me in some very important ways. But it wasn't just the experience of bullying that shaped me. It was my understanding that nobody, not a single person, not a single teacher, stepped in to do anything about it. The community stood idly by. Now, I'm a criminologist by training. I went to school to understand why people behave in harmful ways towards each other. And as part of that training, I've also learned about why people don't step in when harmful behavior occurs. Now, while I specialize in the study of sexual violence, I'm trained as a generalist, which means that I've actually studied all parts of the criminal justice system and criminal behavior. I learned early in my career that the criminal justice system is anything but just. We dehumanize people, we over-criminalize, we over-incarcerate, thinking that doing so will stop people from causing harm, which actually does the opposite. If the criminal justice system is anything but just, then what is justice? Well, I've come to operate with Dr. Cornel West's words in mind. Justice is what love looks like in public. Criminologists like me understand that our current criminal legal policies do very little to reduce crime. We understand that reducing crime requires that we address root causes that are often steeped in pain and trauma, not conscious rational choices to inflict harm. Addressing root causes and known sources of crime is how we stop it. But here's the kicker. The same is also true in how we end harms that don't rise to the level of criminality. None of us get out of this life unscathed. We are all traumatized people. We are all hurting, trying to find our way back to ourselves and to each other. Every single one of us has a story that breaks our hearts, and all of us have caused harm to other people. What I've learned in my work and in my personal life is that hurt people hurt people. But I've also learned that healed people heal people. If we address the hurt, we promote the healing. In 2014, I had a successful career. I was married to the woman I have loved since I was 12. We had 2 children under the age of 5, and my foundation crumbled. You see, the reason I studied criminal justice generally, and sexual violence more specifically, is because I experienced a violent rape when I was 16. Convinced I had dealt with the trauma of my rape by getting a PhD and studying sexual violence, I had never disclosed to anyone and had never done any therapeutic work to process it. I had started writing about my experience for a work-related project when the ruminating thoughts, flashbacks, and nightmares of my early 20s returned with a vengeance. I went to therapy for the first time, began unpacking it all, and reconnecting with myself and others in more healthy ways. At some point early in my therapy work, I disclosed to a close friend and colleague who happens to work with people who perpetrate sexual harm. Through her work, I began participating in restorative justice processes. I would come to her treatment program, sit in group processes with her clients, talk about the impact of my rape and its consequences. I'd ask questions, the clients would ask questions of me. We built connection with one another, in ways I never could have imagined. If justice is what love looks like in public, and love is an intimate thing, then true justice is incredibly intimate. It takes courage and bravery. It requires us to step out of fear, to take off our armors of shame. Restorative justice was a bridge to understanding things my education could never have taught me. I have been around people who have sexually harmed since my grad school days. I'd sat face to face with so many people who had harmed others in exactly the same way that I had been harmed. But I always had the protective researcher, or Dr. Ackerman shield. There was always a successful compartmentalization. That is, until my experience of restorative justice when I was just Alissa. And what I learned was that despite the monster image I had in my head about the man who raped me, or the sadness I felt about the kids who tortured me in my youth, or the sadness I felt for the people who stood idly by and looked the other way, they were all just people, traumatized in their own ways. It doesn't excuse or justify any of the harm, but it helps us to understand in part why it happened. And if we understand why it happened, we can help to fix it. I continued participating in processes with men who had perpetrated sexual harm, working with other treatment providers around the country to bring restorative processes to their clients, and I began creating and facilitating processes in the broader community for survivors who were interested in this kind of healing practice. As I sat with what I was creating, I came to understand that restorative justice is not just a thing one does. It's a value set at the foundation of how I seek to live my life, and it is directly aligned with my Jewish values. They are one and the same. Restorative justice is a human-centered approach to repairing and preventing harm. It's about having difficult conversations, about meeting the needs of people who have been harmed, about helping those who cause harm take full accountability for that harm, and to help them commit to not doing it again. Restorative justice is not about forgiveness or reconciliation. It's not about a return to past circumstances. It's not mediation, because mediation assumes an equal playing field, and harm often happens because power differentials exist. Restorative justice is not about crime or criminality, because people who commit crime are actually no different than people who don't. We all cause harm to others. Yet, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about what restorative justice is. I have had people who have caused serious harm with their words and with their deeds tell me that they do not have to have restorative conversations because they're not criminals. This is short-sighted and wrong, stemming from a place of fear of accountability. It signals to me that they're not ready to take a deep, hard look at themselves and their own pain and shame. A restorative framework requires that we name the harm we have caused, do the work to understand why we did it, make an authentic and appropriate amend, and then live into active accountability that ensures we don't behave that way again. A restorative framework asks us to consider harm as a violation of people and relationships, that violations create obligations, and that repairing harm involves the person who was harmed, the person who caused the harm, and the broader community. Restorative justice is driven by the needs of the person that was harmed. That person is under no obligation to have a conversation with the person who harmed them. In fact, in my work, I would never consider bringing two parties together unless the person who had caused the harm was ready to take full responsibility for their behavior. Now, as we stand here on Kol Nidre, we turn inward to reflect on the harms and sins we've caused. We are standing here after 10 days of teshuvah, of repentance. We dedicate all of who we are, mind, body, and spirit, to taking account of where we have gone wrong and what we can do to fix it. This requires us to look inward and to do a lot of self-reflection. The concept of teshuvah requires that we first turn to those we have harmed and then to God. But how many of us actually took a hard look at ourselves, committed to changing our behavior, and made a direct amend to someone, anyone we've harmed in the last year? Teshuvah, like the accountability of restorative justice, is active. It is not passive, and it is not easy. If we do not own the harm we've caused, if we don't take the steps to fix it, we are bound to continue committing the same harm over and over again. Teshuvah, like restorative justice, offers a path toward repair. It isn't something we should only do during the Chagim. It offers a possibility, an opportunity for connection, whenever we believe we have caused harm. On Yom Kippur, we confess to the harm we've caused, al chet shechatanu lefanecha, for the sins we have committed before you. Yet most of us never take the necessary action to truly repent, to be truly accountable. We confess to the harm we've caused through prayer on Yom Kippur, but we rarely acknowledge the harm directly to the person we hurt. Rabbi Paul Kipnis writes that if teshuvah is to be more than a simple way for the sinner to feel good again, if it is to become a tool for repairing souls, then it must transcend the realm of emotion and conversation and enter the tangible world of action. To reconcile with the person wronged begins with sincere amend. It continues with a long-term investment of our time and energy, as long as is necessary, until the harm doer and the person wronged are able to work through the problem. Rabbi Kipnis writes that teshuvah will only be shlema, complete, when we resolve not to do it again, when we resolve not to fall into the same patterns of behavior when dealing with similar situations. This is the hardest work in which we will ever engage. It's at the heart of teshuvah and at the very core of who we are as a people. Now, my restorative justice work in the broader community has led to consulting and facilitating processes in the Jewish world related to sexual harm, bullying, and other forms of abuse which are pervasive. I've worked with individuals who have caused psychological, emotional, and physical harm, those who have transgressed ethical boundaries typically related to underappreciated power dynamics and abuse of power. I have worked with small Jewish organizations consulting on their sexual misconduct and ethics policies, synagogues that did nothing or failed in how they responded to disclosures, and large Jewish organizations seeking to respond to harm committed in their midst. People who are harmed will tell you that getting beyond the direct harm is actually the easy part. It's the indirect harm caused by those who stand idly by, who do nothing, who say nothing, who look the other way, who hold up harm doers, who know about harmful and sometimes criminal behavior and do not demand accountability. These indirect harms are much harder to heal from. We must atone for that too. It's exactly the kind of harm that the restorative processes in which I am engaged in the Jewish world are built upon. It's not the direct harm that is being dealt with. It is the institutional and communal betrayal that survivors are asking to be addressed. The harms we cause by standing idly by. Institutional and communal betrayal include wrongdoings perpetrated by or within an institution or community, including failure to prevent or respond supportively to wrongdoings committed within the context of the institution. Oftentimes, this occurs because of betrayal blindness, which Dr. Jennifer Freyd defines as the unawareness, not knowing, and forgetting by people towards betrayal in order to preserve relationships, institutions, and social systems upon which they depend. Elie Wiesel said that to remain silent and indifferent is the greatest sin of all. And in Leviticus 19:16, we read, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, do not stand idly by while your neighbor bleeds. We have an individual and collective responsibility to hold harm doers to account. We often think that we are powerless to make change, that our voices don't matter, that we will be harmed too by speaking up. But when we turn a blind eye or claim ignorance, when we look the other way or diminish the pain of a community member, when we try to explain things away in our minds when something doesn't seem right, when we do this to protect our own place in a community, we are complicit. We are complicit in creating environments where there is no accountability, complicit in creating environments that allows harm to continue. I implore you to think about this the next time you think about looking the other way or not speaking up. We have a collective responsibility to one another to create healthy environments for all of us to thrive. The flip side of betrayal is courage. Dr. Jennifer Freyd speaks of institutional courage as an institution's commitment to seek the truth and engage in moral action, despite unpleasantness, despite risk, despite short-term cost. It is a compass oriented to the common good of individuals, institutions, and the world. It is a force that transforms institutions into more accountable, equitable, effective places for everyone. This is at the heart of what Dr. Cornel West meant when he said that justice is what love looks like in public. There is no love and there is no justice when there is no accountability. Our current responses to crime and harm are not born out of love. They are born out of fear. But restorative justice and true teshuvah are born out of love. When people come together to find solutions and address root causes at the heart of individual and communal harm, that is love, and it is just. When people are held accountable in ways that are meaningful, centered on the needs of those who have been harmed, and conducted in open and transparent ways, that is love, and it is just. Restorative justice does not excuse or justify harmful behavior. It helps us find unique and creative ways of healing individual and collective harms. Teshuvah teaches us that it's never too late to change, but it requires us to dig deep and authentically own our behavior. No rationalizations, no justifications, no excuses. Teshuvah and restorative justice requires that we confess to those we've hurt, directly and indirectly, and accept full responsibility for our actions. But what happens when, despite our best intentions and Jewish teachings, the person or community that harmed us is incapable of or unwilling to take action to try to repair the damage? How do we respond when we're not treated with justice and mercy? How do we react or behave in restorative ways, even when those who've wronged us are unable or unwilling to do so? Restorative justice is a Jewish value. It isn't something I just do as a facilitator. It's how I try to live my life. I don't always succeed, but I try to remember that we are all B'Tselem Elohim, made in the image of God. It means that I try to remember that people who cause harm are themselves people who are hurting. It means that I seek to build this world with love and chesed. We can't make people be apologetic for the harms they cause. Some people and some communities will never be ready to do so. But we can seek to live into our values of tikkun olam, to leave our parts of the world better than we found them. We can try to be accountable for our own actions, and we can seek to hold our leaders and communities to account, modeling this way of living for others. Healing from interpersonal or communal harm requires connection because acts of harm disconnect us from ourselves and from the people around us. Teshuvah and restorative justice offer us an opportunity to find our way back to our most authentic selves. And when we do that work, we find our way back to each other. I am 8 years old, sitting on the rotten wooden steps of a portable classroom building. I can still smell the humid Florida air. I can hear the children playing in the wet grass. I can feel the sadness in the pit of my stomach. It's visceral. The experience of being bullied for much of my childhood shaped me in very important ways. But it was my understanding that nobody, not a single person, not a single teacher, stepped in to do anything about it that has forever left its mark. It shaped me into a person who endeavors to never stand idly by. I seek to ensure that people and communities have a voice to upset unjust practices and systems. It has led me to being dubbed a troublemaker, a term meant as an insult that I have taken on as a source of pride. Unfortunately, the willingness to stand idly by, to look the other way, I continue to witness this type of behavior in the Jewish world. But tzedek tirdof, justice we shall pursue. Justice is what we are called to do, so it's confusing to me when we don't pursue it. Justice is what love looks like in public, and it demands accountability. Martin Luther King said that the silence of the good people is more dangerous than the brutality of the bad people. I don't believe that people are inherently bad. I believe that people who behave in harmful ways are just incredibly hurt. We're called to do something to help heal the hurt, to build on love. And even when we have not directly harmed, the indirect actions of our silence and complicity inflict more harm than we could ever imagine. Elie Wiesel said that to remain silent and indifferent is the greatest sin of all. I implore all of us to call deep on our courage, to not remain indifferent to the harm we've caused directly, and to not remain indifferent to the pain and suffering of others. This is hard work, and it is terrifying to do. But kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzar me'od. The world is a very narrow bridge, and the important thing is not to be afraid. So let's start today. Let's return to ourselves. Let's begin the work. But don't let it stop when the sun sets tomorrow evening, when we go back to our daily lives after the gates are closed and the book is sealed. The hard work continues. Restorative justice is inherently a Jewish value, and like teshuvah, it is at the core of who we are as a people. I hope that in this coming year we lean into this new understanding, that we lean into our fear and our discomfort, that we find our way back to our most authentic selves, and ultimately back to each other. Ken Yehi Ratzon.